Have you ever stopped believing in love after something happened to you? I didn't decide to stop believing in love. It just slowly stopped feeling real. I was 18, maybe 19, that age where everything feels final, where emotions don't come in shades, only extremes. I gave everything I had to that relationship. Not halfway, not cautiously. I went all in. I opened parts of myself I'd never shared with anyone before. My insecurities, my hopes, the kind of thoughts you only say out loud when you believe the person in front of you is the one. At the time, I truly believed she was. I bought into all of it. The future talk, the late-night promises, the idea that if you loved hard enough, things would work out. I didn't hold back because I didn't know how to yet. No emotional seatbelt. No plan B. When it ended, it didn't just hurt. It collapsed something inside me. The breakup wasn't even dramatic. There was no huge betrayal I could point to and say, that's where it broke. It was worse than that. It was slow distancing, confusion, the realization that I cared much more deeply than she did, and that love alone doesn't keep someone from walking away. After it ended, I felt exposed, like I'd handed someone a map of my inner world and watched them leave with it. I'm 25 now. From the outside, nothing looks wrong. I function. I work. I laugh with friends. I don't sit around talking about how love ruined me. I don't hate women. I don't go on angry rants about relationships. But something changed back then, and it never fully reset. I didn't swear off love dramatically. I didn't say, that's it, I'm done forever. It was quieter than that. I just stopped chasing it. Stopped looking. Stopped putting myself in situations where something might begin. No dating apps. No going out hoping to meet someone. No, maybe this could turn into something. If love finds me someday, fine. I'm not closed off to the idea completely, but I stopped pursuing it. Because pursuing it means risking that version of myself again, the one who believed without hesitation. What people don't tell you is that heartbreak doesn't just make you sad. Sometimes it rewires your confidence. I used to feel chosen, desired, like I was enough just being myself. After that relationship, that feeling vanished. It never came back the same way. I started second-guessing everything. My value, my appeal, my ability to be loved without overextending myself. Every time I imagine opening up like that again, there's a quiet voice that says, remember how this ends. And that voice is persuasive. I know I'm older now, smarter, more self-aware. I know not every relationship ends that way. I know one person's inability to love me fully doesn't define my worth. But knowing something logically doesn't undo what your body learned emotionally. That relationship taught me how deeply I could love, but it also taught me how exposed that makes you. And once you've experienced that kind of emotional free fall, a part of you learns to protect itself by stepping back. So no, I didn't stop believing in love completely. I just stopped believing it was safe to look for it. At 24, right after the breakup, I did what a lot of people do when silence gets too loud. I opened dating apps. At first it felt harmless. Swiping gave me something to do with my hands. Matches felt like proof that I was still wanted. Conversations filled the empty hours that used to belong to someone else. It felt like movement, like recovery. But it didn't take long to notice how hollow it all was. Every interaction felt rushed, disposable. People disappeared mid-conversation like it was nothing. I started measuring my value in responses, in matches, and how quickly someone replied. On good days, it was a temporary ego boost. On bad days, it made everything feel worse. What really hit me was realizing how different it all felt from years ago. Dating apps used to feel social. You could talk, explore, connect without constantly being pushed toward upgrades, subscriptions, boosts. Now everything felt monetized. Like loneliness itself had become a business model. The more time I spent there, the more anxious and disconnected I felt. So I stopped. Not dramatically. I just deleted everything one night and didn't reinstall it. And for the first time since the breakup, I sat with myself without trying to distract the feeling away. This year I'll be 25. And somewhere between deleting those apps and spending more time alone than I ever had before, something shifted. I stopped chasing the idea of a relationship altogether. Not out of bitterness. Not because I think love is fake. But because I realized I didn't actually know myself outside of wanting to be chosen. For the first time, I made a quiet decision. I'm not looking right now. No timelines. No pressure. No background anxiety about falling behind. I'm focusing on my health, my routines, my finances, my mental state. I'm learning how to build a life that doesn't depend on someone else filling the gaps for me. That doesn't mean I've closed the door on love completely. If I meet someone special organically, great. If something real develops naturally, I won't run from it. But I'm done forcing connections just to avoid being alone or to prove something to myself. I think what I really lost after that breakup wasn't faith in love, it was faith in shortcuts. I stopped believing that healing comes from attention. That connection comes from convenience. that replacing someone is the same as moving on. Right now, I'm choosing myself, not in a cliché way, in a quiet, steady, unromantic way. And for the first time in a long while, that actually feels like progress. I never wanted to get married. That wasn't a phase or some edgy stance. It was something I knew about myself early on and never felt the urge to justify. What changed wasn't my opinion about marriage. It was my relationship with dating itself. At some point, I just stopped trying. Not because I hated relationships. Not because someone shattered my heart in a dramatic way. But because I kept running into the same quiet problem over and over again. People saw me as a long-term investment before they saw me as a person. Friends would say it casually. You're such a catch. Any woman would want to lock you down. You're the kind of guy people want to build a life with. It was meant as a compliment, but it landed like pressure. Every date started to feel like an interview I hadn't applied for. Questions about stability, future plans, where I saw myself in 5 or 10 years. I could feel expectations forming across the table before I even decided whether I liked the person sitting in front of me. And that made me realize 2 uncomfortable things. First, the dating pool for women must be exhausting. The more I listened, the more it became clear how often women run into men who don't listen, don't show up, don't communicate, don't take responsibility. I understood why they were tired, why they were searching for someone solid, someone safe, and somehow, I was being placed in that role by default. The second realization was harder to admit. I didn't want what they wanted. Not kids, not a timeline, not a shared future blueprint. And the longer this pattern repeated, the more dating started to feel dishonest, even when I was upfront. I'd say it clearly. I'm not looking for marriage. I'm not planning the traditional path. I don't want to waste anyone's time. They'd nod. Say they understood. Say they were just seeing where things go. But I could feel it underneath. The hope. The quiet belief that I'd change my mind. That I'd come around. That I'd eventually want more. And I hated the idea that just being myself could slowly turn into disappointment for someone else. So I stepped away. I deleted the apps. Stopped agreeing to setups. Stopped going out with the intention of meeting anyone. Not because I felt bitter, but because I felt responsible. I didn't want to become the person who keeps hurting people simply by not wanting the same future they do. I didn't want to be the guy women look back on and think, why wasn't I enough for him to choose more? What people don't talk about is how isolating it can feel to be labeled valuable when your definition of value doesn't match the one being projected onto you. Love, as it's often presented, feels transactional. Like once you check enough boxes, the next step is mandatory. And if you hesitate, you become the problem. Over time, my belief in love didn't disappear, but it narrowed. I stopped believing in love as something flexible, something that could exist without long-term promises attached, something that didn't need to justify itself with milestones. Now, when I think about relationships, I don't feel excited or hopeful. I feel cautious, protective, aware of how easily expectations creep in, even when no one means harm. Maybe one day I'll meet someone who wants the same kind of connection I do, one without pressure, without timelines, without the assumption that love always needs to turn into something bigger to be real. But until then, I'd rather be alone than slowly disappoint someone just by being honest about who I am. And that's the part that made me stop believing, not in love itself, but in the version of love people keep insisting is the only one that counts. At 32, I'm still open to something serious, but I no longer organize my life around the search for it. That took time to learn. In my 20s, relationships were the center of gravity. Every decision quietly revolved around potential compatibility, where I lived, how I spent weekends, how flexible my plans were just in case something turned into something more. I didn't notice it back then, but I was constantly shaping my life to be appealing, adjustable, ready. And when relationships didn't work out, it felt like a personal failure, like I'd miscalculated something essential about myself. Now, at 32, the mindset is different. I still want something real. I still believe in long-term connection, in choosing someone and building something meaningful together. I haven't turned cynical. I haven't shut the door on love. But it's no longer the axis everything spins on. The biggest change is that I don't rush anymore. I know what I'm willing to compromise on and what I'm not. I'll adjust habits, routines, priorities for the right person. I'll make space, emotionally and practically, when it actually makes sense. But I'm no longer making sacrifices in advance for someone who doesn't exist yet. That shift didn't come from giving up. It came from finally taking myself seriously. For a long time, I treated relationships like the missing piece that would organize everything else. As if once I found the right person, the rest of life would fall into place. But experience taught me the opposite. If your life isn't grounded on its own, relationships tend to become pressure points instead of support systems. So now I focus on my own structure first. My work, my health, my friendships, the way my days actually feel, not how they look on paper. Dating still happens, but it doesn't dictate my sense of progress. If someone comes into my life and adds clarity instead of chaos, that matters. If being with them feels like expansion rather than negotiation, I'll meet them halfway without hesitation. But until then, I'm not standing still. I've learned that compromise only works when it's mutual and conscious, not when it's fueled by fear of missing out or the quiet anxiety of being alone. I don't need to bend my life into uncomfortable shapes just to prove I'm open to love. There's a calm that comes with this phase. Not indifference, not detachment, just patience. I don't believe love has a deadline anymore. I don't believe choosing yourself disqualifies you from deep connection. And I don't believe wanting something serious means you have to pause your life while waiting for it. If I meet the right person, I'll know, not because they complete something missing, but because they fit into a life that already feels whole. And until then, I'm exactly where I need to be. For me, it wasn't one relationship that changed how I felt about love. It was the accumulation of almost relationships. The kind that never fully start but manage to drain you anyway. Years went by where I kept getting close enough to invest emotionally, close enough to imagine possibilities, but never close enough to actually land somewhere solid. Each time, I told myself it was just bad timing. Wrong stage of life. Poor communication. External circumstances. Individually, none of them seemed devastating. Together, they rewired how I approach connection. I learned to brace myself instead of leaning in. To expect ambiguity instead of clarity. To assume that if something felt good, it probably wouldn't last long enough to matter. And slowly, without deciding to, I stopped trusting momentum. I noticed it most when people asked me what I was looking for. I used to answer confidently. Now I hesitated. Not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because I wasn't sure it existed in a form that didn't come with constant uncertainty. What hurt the most wasn't rejection. It was inconsistency. One day someone would feel fully present, curious, engaged. The next day they'd pull back just enough to keep me guessing. I'd analyze texts, reread conversations, wonder if I'd said too much or not enough. That state became familiar, almost normal. Love started to feel like something unstable by nature. At some point, I realized I had begun protecting myself by disengaging early. I'd sensed potential depth and quietly stepped back. Not because I didn't want it, but because I didn't want to repeat the emotional whiplash of investing in something that evaporated without explanation. This didn't make me bitter. It made me careful in a way that felt heavy. I stopped romanticizing connection. Stopped believing that effort alone could stabilize something fragile. I stopped telling myself that if two people want it badly enough, it will work, because experience had shown me how often wanting wasn't mutual or sustained. Still, I didn't give up completely. I just stopped forcing hope where there wasn't structure to support it. I started paying attention to consistency instead of chemistry, to follow through instead of words, to how people handled uncertainty instead of how they talked about the future. In doing so, my belief in love didn't disappear, it matured. Love stopped being something I chased and became something I evaluated. Not cynically, but realistically. I stopped treating disappointment like a personal failing and started seeing it as information. And with that shift, I felt lighter. Not because I'd closed myself off, but because I was no longer pouring energy into connections that required me to minimize my needs to survive. I still believe love exists. I just don't believe it should feel like confusion, anxiety, or constant guessing. And if being single means waiting for something that feels steady instead of dramatic, I'm at peace with that. Because losing faith in the fantasy of love doesn't mean losing faith in connection. Sometimes it's the first step towards something real. I didn't lose faith in love because it failed me. I lost faith in the version of love I was taught to expect. For most of my life, I believed love was supposed to feel obvious, certain, self-sustaining. I believed that if two people chose each other, everything else would fall into place. Effort would feel natural, commitment would feel easy, and doubt would disappear with time. That belief survived my first relationship. It didn't survive the one that followed. This time, I did everything right. I communicated. I was patient. I showed up consistently. I didn't play games, didn't keep score, didn't pull away when things felt uncomfortable. I trusted words. I trusted intentions. And still, it unraveled. Not explosively, quietly. I watched promises soften into maybes. Future plans turn vague. Emotional availability become conditional. Every time I addressed it, I was met with reassurance, not change. That's when something inside me started to disconnect. I realized love, as I had imagined it, wasn't enough. Because love didn't automatically mean alignment, or effort, or accountability. You could care deeply and still be unwilling to do the work required to stay connected. That realization was disorienting. I didn't stop believing in love overnight. but I stopped assuming it would protect me. After that, I noticed how guarded I'd become. I no longer attached quickly. I no longer believed intensity meant intention. I didn't open myself the same way, not because I was afraid, but because I understood what it cost to do so without reciprocity. I became slower, more observant, less forgiving of patterns I once excused as temporary. People noticed the change. They said I seemed more distant, more selective, less romantic. What they didn't see was that I had simply stopped sacrificing clarity for hope. I still want connection. I still value depth. But I no longer believe love alone will carry a relationship across misalignment, avoidance, or unmet needs. And strangely, that shift didn't make me colder. It made me steadier. I stopped chasing reassurance and started paying attention to behavior. I stopped investing in potential and started investing in presence. I stopped believing that wanting something badly enough would make it viable. I didn't stop believing in love. I stopped believing it was enough by itself. And that change didn't close my heart. It taught me how to protect it without shutting it down. The moment I realized something had changed wasn't during a breakup. It was months after, when nothing hurt anymore, and that scared me. I used to feel deeply. Too deeply, maybe. When I liked someone, it showed in everything. The way I listened, the way I planned ahead, the way I imagined futures I hadn't earned yet. Love, to me, was something you stepped into fully, even if it meant getting hurt. Then there was one relationship that didn't end dramatically. No betrayal, no big explosion. Just a slow erosion of effort on one side, while I kept trying to hold things together. I kept adjusting, compromising, explaining myself more clearly, more gently, hoping something would finally click. It didn't. When it ended, I went through the usual stages: shock, sadness, anger, but what lingered afterward was different. It wasn't heartbreak. It was detachment. Time passed. I healed. I rebuilt my routine. I told myself I was okay. And I was. But I also noticed something unsettling. When new people entered my life, nothing reached me the same way anymore. I could enjoy their company. I could be interested, even attracted. But that internal pull, that urge to invest emotionally, just wasn't there. I didn't feel broken. I felt switched off. At first, I thought it was a phase. Maybe I needed more time. Maybe I just hadn't met the right person yet. But as months turned into years, the pattern stayed the same. I kept people at a careful distance without consciously trying to. It wasn't fear. It was disbelief. Somewhere along the line, I stopped trusting that emotional investment would be returned in a meaningful way. Not because people were bad, but because wanting the same depth didn't seem to be enough to guarantee anything. I started prioritizing peace over passion. I noticed how often people glorify intense beginnings while ignoring sustainability. How easily words are offered without follow-through. How quickly connection is promised, and just as quickly withdrawn when things require effort. That didn't make me cynical. It made me realistic, but at a cost. I began to wonder if I'd lost something essential. If being careful had turned into emotional minimalism. If protecting myself meant never fully opening again. The strange part is, I don't miss the chaos. I don't miss the anxiety, the overthinking, the constant hope and doubt cycle. What I miss is the certainty, the belief that loving deeply was worth it no matter how it ended. Now, love feels conditional in my mind. Calculated. Something you approach slowly, with proof instead of faith. I haven't given up on it completely. I don't think I ever will. But I no longer assume love is something you fall into. I think it's something you build, carefully, deliberately, or not at all. And sometimes I wonder if losing blind faith in love is just part of growing up. Or if it's something you never fully get back once life shows you how fragile it actually is.